I'm looking forward to listening to Laura and welcome you here. Thank you very much.
I really appreciate having so many people here and all the work that has gone in to preparing this series. And that reading table over there, if that doesn't inspire you, then I probably can't either. But it's a pretty impressive set of work that the folks have done coming into this, and an exciting series, and I'm really honored to be a part of it. So thank you. I'm going to switch to that mic so I'm more unified with my slides for the video. Just a minute. I have to take this one off. Okay. Okay, so, you know, I'm Laura Grasser, I'm an economist. Cows, we really did, now I'm getting home. I've talked a lot about the Wisconsin economy for the last 20 years, and sometimes I get a little sad about it. So one of the things we're going to work on tonight is getting me through the facts on the economy faster to the what to do, because I really love to talk about the economy, and there's a lot of bad news that we could spend a lot of time on, but I will head to move through that pretty quickly and get to the what should we be doing, what can we do together, and why maybe economists aren't the only people who are relevant to the conversation. So let's see, just a little bit on me and cows. Cows really was, I think the acronym was selected just to make that joke. So we don't do ag stuff at all. Really, we just are the Center on Wisconsin Strategy, so we can say cows. And generally, the closer I am to the state of Wisconsin, the more people find it amusing. And the further I am from the state of Wisconsin, the more people feel deep pity for me. We're working in a place called cows, and I can kind of tell exactly how far I am. Like, if the room is like mortified, I'm in New York City. So you know, it's you know, kind of a joke, and that's our name. And we do a lot of work inside and outside the state on work and wages, but also we have a big transportation project that does work with secretaries of transportation from different states. We have a network of progressive mayors called the Mayor's Innovation Project that gets progressive urban policy and discussions going among mayors. There's a lot of interesting stuff on our website that is far from what I do, which is mostly about low-wage jobs in the Wisconsin economy. But we keep track of people. You know, you can friend us on Facebook. You know, you can like us on Facebook. We wouldn't really be friends exactly, but you know, it would start that deep social media relationship where you just like occasionally see something from us. There's also Cows Notes that you can sign up for on email, which whenever we release something, and monthly there's a release on the Wisconsin economy because the jobs data comes out with the feds, then you get a little email. So you can be in touch with us those ways, and you can feel free to be in touch with me. That's my phone number and email. And this is a picture of what Cows is always trying to think about doing, which is building the high road. We say building the high road, and by that we mean that there is a better way to do business in this country, even under the conditions of capitalism that we live. There are ways to do business that don't treat people like roadkill and the earth like a sewer, that we can have systems of production that embrace the inputs of workers and elevate productivity, that reduce waste and consciously pay attention to the environmental time horizon, that we can do that much more systematically through policy and practice than we do. And Cows has consistently tried to just find ways to demonstrate the possibility and make that happen. And so that's a little bit about what that picture is, but we'll come back to that in the happy talk part of the talk. Now we'll do the sad talk. Ooh, come on, there you go. All right. So every year on Labor Day, we release a report called The State of Working Wisconsin, and this is a kind of summary of that. You can find the whole document on the website. website. I'm going to go through 4 key defining trends in the national and state economy, and they sort of back out in time. I think the first thing that people tend to think about, most recently, of course, is the brutal recession of December 2007. Do you know there's a little committee of economists? It's dudes, really, mostly dudes, that's economists. And they sit in a room, and then after events happen, they say when they happen. So that committee of dudes got together and said it was December of 2007. So when I say the start of the recession, I'm going to say December 2007. When you experienced that recession, you experienced it, here's how it ran. $4 an hour gas, housing bubble, summer of 2008. We come into the primary season, remember? And Sarah Palin lands. Bing. And then boom, Lehman collapses, mid-September 2008. That's when you think the recession started, and that's when the collapse happened. Things were turning down in 2007. It related back to the housing bubble, which actually started popping even 6 months before that. But anyway, so December 2007 is the start of that recession. It is a brutal recession by any measure, the biggest we've had since the Great Depression. We lose 6% of the job base over 6 months. And you remember this, maybe, just waiting. Well, maybe you don't remember quite like I do, you sound like waiting for that number that the feds announced on national job loss to finally fall back below 500,000, right? Month after month, at 750,000, 500,000 jobs lost. Boom, boom, boom. That collapse, and then the slow recovery. And maybe you know, if you follow these numbers, that we finally got back at the national level to the 2007 employment peak last year. That is a slow recovery by any standard. And this is, in fact, the economic news. And it is also the economic news that you pay attention to in this state, because Wisconsin's recovery was, in fact, slower. Significantly slower. We got back to 2007 about 9 months late. We're tend to run about 2/3 to half the rate of job production of the national. That's also news, and has been political news as well. But that is a pretty brutal context that we've been living in. And here on this chart, that's the 90,000 missing jobs. If we had grown at the national rate, if we had just grown from the bottom of the cellar of the recession, this is still kind of hummy. Is it? I mean, is it like now? Okay. If we had just grown at the national rate, we would have 90,000 more jobs today than we do. And that's something we've all spent a lot of time talking about in this state. But it's worth remembering that there's all sorts of things that are going on beyond that. And this is the slightly one step further out. It's one step further out from that short-term story of economic collapse that I think most of us have really focused on, to the question of the last 40 years of economic growth. And this is what that brutal recession landed on top of, right? This is the context of what's gone on in the state and national economy over the last 40 years. In 1979, a median worker earned, I guess I'm doing 1738. So today, the median worker in the state economy earns $17.38 an hour. The current median wage, okay, so one thing is, yes, I always talk about medians, and now we'll go on to, we really came here on a Friday night for a little stats class, right? So you may remember that the median isn't exactly the mean. The mean is you add everybody up, you divide by the number that everybody is, that gives you the average. The median is you put everybody in a row from lowest to highest, or highest to lowest. You put them all in a row, and then you pick the person at the middle. Why do you pick the median instead of the mean? Because Brett Favre changes the mean. Because high earners move the mean up. And if you talk to the person in the middle, you get a sense of the center of what jobs are producing, right? What jobs you have. That's what you get by asking the median. That's why I always do the median. Interestingly, perhaps for you, this matters less in the state of Wisconsin than almost any other state. Do you know why? We don't have as many rich people as most states. We don't have a lot of people. This is true in income and wealth, but it's also true in wages. And so ours moves less than many states because we just don't have as big a high end as many states. Still, I always use the median. I look at the median worker in 2014, $17.38 an hour. For those of you who think in salaries, 2,000 hours a year, more or less, 34,000, right? So 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, 2,000 hours. $17 is 34,000, $10 an hour is 20,000, back and forth, you can go that way. So this is 34,000 a year, 35. It's 71 cents an hour once you take inflation into account, higher than the median worker earned in 1979. 71 cents an hour compared to the median worker of 1979. That is long-term wage stagnation. That's an increase of an hourly wage of 2 cents an hour over a 35-year period. Well, 2 cents a year, right? That median worker is worth remembering. In 1979, had less education and was substantially less productive than the median worker is today. Our economy is 70% or 80% larger than it was in 1979 in terms of the total value of goods and services produced. The median worker earns the same wage, more or less, as they did in 1979. What does that little piece of stats tell you? Inequality. You cannot have an 80% increase in the overall value of goods and services in your economy produced, and the median worker still earning the same amount of money without somebody earning a lot more, right? So when people talk about inequality and when people talk about long-term wage stagnation, they're in fact talking about two sides of the same coin, the same 2 cents a year, right? It's long-term wage stagnation. It's also a shift in where rewards to economic growth have gone. Sometimes people call this the process of turning economic growth into a spectator sport, right? So the economy grows, but I don't notice. My wage doesn't go up. All right, so that's the first long-term big downer, because, you know, Friday night. Oh, here's another downer that I do for y'all. And this one, so I said Wisconsin is not incredibly unequal. If you line everybody up in terms of income, and you compare the top 10th percentile to the bottom 10th percentile, that disparity, not so bad. But where are we off the charts? On racial inequality. And I only have the stats here for black-white inequality because I use data that has sample size problems in almost every other direction. But for black-white inequality, we're consistently off the charts. And this, I feel like, is probably not something you experience every day in your community, but it is a defining feature of this state. It, in fact, plays into all the politics of this state. And so this racial inequality that is quite ruinous is actually defining things in this state and about the economic possibilities in this state in ways that are, you know, distant from the fact that your community probably is not very diverse. 80% of the black population in the state lives in Milwaukee, Racine, and Kenosha, right? So this is a, you know, you can say, well, it's their problem. But Milwaukee is our urban center. And as Milwaukee goes, the state goes. And so I think paying attention to this one matters. I've done the litany here, we have a report called Extreme Racial Disparity that you can go look at. It does the litany. If you, and I guess I should say a couple of things about the structure of our racial inequality. One thing is that the state tends to do relatively well for white people. So whites do about national average, slightly above. African Americans in the state tend to do pretty much at the bottom or close to the bottom. That makes the difference between the two consistently the highest in the nation. So we produce more disparity than Mississippi, because white folks in Mississippi don't do that well. Black folks don't do that well. They're closer together than we are. You can see it in this, I threw up the unemployment rate for African Americans in 2014, which is 20%. And I just want you to pause for a second to think about an unemployment rate of 20%. That's a level that is essentially the worst of the Great Depression. 1 in 5 black workers in the state in 2014, 5 years after the economic recovery began, 1 in 5 black workers was unemployed. That's a rate that's 4.5 times higher than the white rate in the state. And so among the worst in the nation. I think that one is the worst in the nation. Yes. And if you look at educational outcomes, income, child poverty, you will consistently find that disparity off the charts. Okay, that's down to number 2. How y'all doing? I mean, other than the dead. With me? Okay. I have this laser pointer, which I thought I could maybe point at people who fall asleep. But I won't. Okay, so then the other thing that I pay a lot of attention to is the structure of jobs, especially at the bottom of the labor market. Because you can have things going on at the median of the labor market, and we talked about that a little bit, but I care also about this set of jobs at the bottom of the labor market. And I make, there's different ways to identify what's a bad job. I'm going to identify bad jobs in terms of a wage standard. And I do this, other people do this, isn't unique to me, but I say, okay, if I worked full-time, full year, and made $11.36 an hour, $11.55, sorry, needed to inflate 1 year, $11.55 an hour, I would keep my family 4 out of poverty. Now, the poverty threshold, many of you are processing different things right now. First of all, you're saying the poverty threshold for a family of 4 is $23,000? So you can kind of sit with that one for a while, because I'm 2 adults and 2 kids at $23,000 a year is a pretty big stretch by any standard of the imagination. And if you ask people what the minimum for living is, they will consistently say 200% of the poverty line. If you could just kind of ask people, what does it cost to live? People generally say about $40,000 for a family of 4, not 23. But anyway, this is the federal standard, and it's just a way to kind of cut jobs. I just want to cut jobs into, slightly better and really bad. So I cut them at $11.55. And yes, $11.55 in New York City is different than $11.55 in Ashland, even than Milwaukee and Ashland, I'm sure. Still, it's just a way to cut the jobs, and I don't know where everybody lives anyway, so this is what I'm going to do. I look at jobs that pay less than $11.55. 1 in 4 workers earn that level of wages. A lot of people, often in audiences I speak to, not always, there's a lot more college degrees than there are in the general population, 4-year college degrees. So a lot of times people think that $11.55 or less, the kind of sectors I'm talking about, are jobs that you have for a little while, because you maybe had those jobs for a little while, right? We all maybe had some kind of low-wage job for a little while, but many people in the rooms I speak to don't for their whole lives. There are many people who work in jobs for their whole lives, 11, 10, 11 bucks an hour. I just finished a survey of the childcare workforce in the state of Wisconsin. If you commit your life to childcare in this state, you will never clear the poverty. There are ways you will never clear the poverty wage. And even with a 4-year college degree in early childhood ed, if you're in the private side, you're going to be looking at 13 bucks an hour for life. That's $26,000 a year, just barely over the poverty line for a family of 4. Okay, so one thing I wanted to emphasize is this is like 1 in 4 workers. Another thing is that for many people, this is their life, not the thing they do while they're in college or the thing they do to get into a better job, but really a long-term career. And I have to say, the other thing that's important to me, and I think has become more true, is bad jobs tend to come in bad packages. And what I mean is that not only do low-wage workers get a low wage, they often have volatile, flexible hours where the flexibility is all applied to the employer side, right? So if I don't see floor count at my grocery store, I send some folks home. This is new, actually. 30 years ago, hours were much more regular. You had a full-time job, you had a full-time job. There's been a bit of a revolution in especially the retail sector and a little bit the food service sector to make staffing much more responsive to demand. And wow, this makes perfect sense from the employer side, because why keep extra staff around when there's no demand for it? It is a nightmare for scheduling from the worker side, because what do you do when you don't get enough hours in your job? You get another job. And if you don't know your schedule on one job, you can't get another job, right? So the flexibility not only reduces hours, but it makes the worker take the volatility, which makes it very hard to make up the hours by getting another job. And that's a restructuring that's happened over the last few years, especially in retail. Also, the few benefits, lower wage workers almost never, except in the public sector, do low wage workers ever have a pension of any sort. They may have the ability to donate or contribute to their own retirement, but at very low wages, it's very hard to make those contributions because you're strapped. And even health insurance at the bottom, although the ACA changes a lot of that stuff at the bottom. Okay, and I know that a lot of times we think the restructuring of work is the result of globalization, right? And especially a region that's been hit by globally competitive forces, right? And has watched manufacturing jobs go overseas, right? Makes you think that's your first answer. These are the three big sectors for low-wage work. This is about 60% of low-wage jobs in the state are in these three sectors. Retail, food service, no one. There is no food service worker, right, facing ruinous wage competition from a food service worker in Malaysia, right? This is not a story of globalization in these instances. Retail the same way, those are local jobs. And let me say the third one, the long-term care one, those are essentially public jobs. It is public policy that has created a set of jobs in home health and long-term care that pay below poverty wages, offer no health insurance benefits, in service of the health insurance sector, right?
I see it differently than you do in regard to globalization, particularly on these first two, because as a result of globalization, jobs have been sent overseas, meaning that the people here that were making the products that are now being made overseas are no longer working and no longer have the income to spend at these places. So the employer, the owner of these places, then says, I don't have the income, I'm hiring fewer people because there's fewer people coming into my establishment because they don't have the money.
Right, and so there are definitely multiple forces going on here, right? But let me say that the U.S. economy, in spite of globalization, is bigger today. The value of goods and services is bigger today than it was 30 years ago.
As a result of inflation?
No, inflation adjusted. It's a bigger economy today than it was. The GDP is higher today than it was 30 years ago.
And it's 0.05 this quarter, which isn't
0.05, but that's annual rates of 1 to 3%. It's slow. I mean, I don't want to go too far down this. It's slow productivity growth by post-war standards. It is still a larger economy. So, but you're right, there are many things that move through this economy, and one of them is that competitive pressure from the production side that flows through into the retail side. That's absolutely true. So, All right, and so now I'm going to do a quick look at this in Wisconsin, 2001 and 2013, what this looks like at the school district level. This is the share of kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch in 2001 versus 2013. And this is the same standard, inflation adjusted over the period, so it's the same standard in 2001 and 2013. In 2001, basically 1 in 5 kids in the state qualified for free and reduced lunch. By 2013, it's 40%, so 2 in 5 qualify. And you can see that it is all over the state. This map on the left, these are the same scale, right? So the lighter is fewer kids, a lower share of kids at the school district level qualifying for free and reduced lunch. And you can see that the map fills up with ink, right? This is true of urban areas and rural districts. It is true of resource and dairy. It is true of industrial and non-industrial. Nearly every district in the state sees a doubling in the share of kids that qualify for free and reduced lunch. That's how this is playing out across, and that's parents who work in low-wage jobs. And I think, if there's people who are in schools know this better than I do, but one of the things that this means is that in a classroom of 20 kids, although now you probably have 25 when you used to have 18, right? In a classroom of 20 kids, instead of having 2 or 3 or 4 kids who are really struggling at home and therefore probably bringing some of those struggles into the school, you have 8 or 9 or 10 kids bringing that struggle into the classroom. You have a bigger classroom, right? You have more students in your classroom. You maybe have less guidance counselors. This is one of the things that, has gone very early in a lot of schools as we have reduced and kind of put the squeeze on school budgets. The kind of resources that help a classroom teacher with students that are struggling have gone away at the same time. And I think that's, a kind of story that's going on underneath this. All right. So I'm going to say there's a couple things going on, this is the picture which everyone struggles to explain. And I'm okay on time. Okay. How are y'all now? Still with me? Happy? Kind of really excited about your Friday night. Thinking about Prince a little bit. Listening to Purple Rain in your heads. Okay. So this is a picture that I was, saying before with words. And this is the growth of the economy compared to the change in compensation over the last 40 years. Now let me say, here, I can do this with my pointer now. This is an exciting moment. No, I really can't. How do I make it? There we go. All right, so this post-war period, here's economic growth where everything moves together, right? So as labor productivity, output per hour, moves up, average hourly compensation and the average hourly wage move along with it. This is why in the whole post-war period, we always just talk about GDP, right? Because if GDP went up, everything else was moving along in the right direction. It was a kind of consensus statistic, and it showed, it implied broader growth. In the 70s, sometime between 1972 and 1979, economists have great debates about that, but clearly sometime in the 1970s, these began to grow apart, right? The median wage, and I include hourly compensation because sometimes people think that the cost of health insurance is what really is going on there, so that compensation line is just to show you, yes, compensation does increase as a share, but it isn't exploding in this trend. So labor productivity continues to increase. Compensation and the hourly wage remains stagnant. Let me say that this picture in the US is unique Now, it isn't true, I mean, if you go to other countries, it isn't true that they all stay in line like this. It is also not true that they all come apart, oops, like this, right? So, any developed country has more inequality today than it did 20 or 30 years ago. The US has way more inequality today than it did 30 years ago. We exceed any other developed country in the growth of inequality, the way these have come apart. There's all sorts of reasons to explain why these have come apart. One, obviously, globalization. And everyone says globalization, technology, right? Those two are true internationally, and it is true that you see the divergence internationally, but you do not see the divergence internationally that you see in the US. And I say that is because we do not have institutions that help hold the economy together or hold growth into that line. This is about unions, and it shows the share of income going to the top 10% is the blue line, and the red line is the share of the labor force covered by a union, right? These move in almost opposite directions. Now, unions are an institution that attempt to tie the growth and the wages together. They aren't the only ones that work, and there are many problems with unions. This is not an ad for unions. This is to suggest the institutional connection between what we set up in our economy, the capacity to negotiate, the capacity to have workers' voices represented. This is what other states, other countries solve in different sorts of ways, very diverse ways, all over the world. But that question doesn't get answered in the US. What is the institution that ties, that works to tie growth to the common good? What is the institution that's going to do that? So that is what everyone is solving at the local level. So now we'll go to the, my slightly more hopeful, and I'm almost done, right? You want me, you want this to end it in like 5 or 10, right? Sure. Okay. So what to do? So I guess I'm gonna go back once. I think it's really important to think about that question of what ties us together. What ties economic growth to local good, right? How do we get the economy as it moves to pull people along? And I think right now we are not answering that generally at a national level with policy. We are answering that, we are trying to answer that at a local level. And that is what you are doing here, is trying to figure out how do we make growth pull us all up together rather than just be a source of incredible wealth for some while others struggle left behind. And so I think it's, and in many ways, the local answer is necessarily a little bit constrained, right? You are constrained by what your capacity is locally, what your resources are, and the fact that you don't really have a policy context that you're working in so much as a kind of collective agreement, right? That you're working on. But what you should do together is what you're doing. Think and think together, I think, is first. And this is clearly part of that process. And of course, what kind of geek who likes data doesn't tell people to go look at more data. But I think this process of figuring out what your community has, what your assets are, and where your relationships are or need to be is the first step to building a different local economy, right? You need data, you need relationships. That's what you're doing. I mean, I don't need to really tell you this, but that is what you're doing. And and then your aim is to try and figure out how to make more of your dollars local, right? So a couple times tonight, you think about the fact that we send a lot of money away to whoever produces non-renewable resources of energy, right? So all of our inefficient use of energy gets sent away. So being more efficient about any energy we use is good, and being more local keeps more of that money locally. So solar farms or whatever. But also think about efficiency. Think about massively increasing the efficiency of your housing stock, because saving is just the same as spending locally, right? Well, not just the same, depending on what you do with it. Don't buy iPhones, you're no better off. But, so one thing is to think about keeping dollars local. One thing is to think about reducing waste instead of only thinking about what you can produce. Also think about what you can save. And then one thing is to think about how equity plays into it. How do you make equity play into it? And then, this is just stuff I think we'll hear more about from the panel. Some of the things I've seen other communities do, and especially in Wisconsin, where we have this tradition of worker-owned co-ops. So Waushara County actually has a worker-owned co-op in home health care. Their county human services runs all of their senior care through a worker-owned co-op that provides the home health care in that county. Those workers get better schedules and make higher wages than workers in home health did before in that county or do in other counties. Thinking hard about the structure of jobs, I guess on this equity thing, I know it's very hard to wave a wand and increase wages. I do think it is very important to think hard about how you structure jobs and whose interests ours are in, right? And so one of the things that doesn't take a wage change that many employers do is respond to workforce needs in terms of scheduling. And whether that's a kind of personal deal or just systematically always going for full-time work first and then adding hours on, or whatever it is. There's different ways that different employers do this, but I think there are a lot of things that can be done about job quality. And I say this from having looked at nursing homes and hotels and home health agencies and childcare, that there is a lot to be done about the quality of job that doesn't necessarily require a change in the wage. It's a lot of thinking about how supervisors are trained, how workers are treated and respected, and how hours and benefits are distributed. Those things are all in employer hands, and often are, I did work with a bunch of nursing homes, and people who are doing nursing homes are not thinking first, and well, many of them, the first thing is not the training and how are we going to hold on to staff. It's how are we going to take care of patients, right? That's what they're trained in. That's what the service they're providing. But to help them think about how do you make the work for the workers, because that's how you're going to make this organization work for the clients, is something that that actually changed a lot of human resource practices in nursing homes around that county. So let's see. Okay, so then those things I've talked about. And then, that's just that cycle about thinking about where is their waste, where is their potential for productivity, trying to do things, seeing what happens, and trying again, right? And that takes knowing each other and trusting each other and doing a lot of fun stuff. But I guess then the other thing I would close on is one thing that I'm struck by is, and this is where I become more philosophical, which is dangerous. But I'm struck that, we sit in the richest country in the planet at the richest point in its existence. And we have a conversation defined by this sort of presentation, which is about how it's not doing what we're supposed to do. We're not getting what we're supposed to get out of this economy, right? And I think, I once was on a panel with, I think of it as, I call him the surly Buddhist. I was on a panel about, I was the economist, and then there were a bunch of religious responses. And there was this Buddhist, and he was really surly, it was comical. And he stood up and, he said this obvious thing, which is that everything about everything I just said is about growth, is about wanting more. The way we ran this economy from 1945 to 1970-something was we all got more, right? Right now, if everybody on this planet consumed like Americans consumed, we need 7 planets to produce that level of consumption for the whole planet, right? We sit on a planet that is straining under the level of consumption that we generate. And I'm telling you, we gotta grow. We gotta consume more. That's what the whole metaphor of economics is in a way, right? Is this idea that growth will make the pie bigger and we'll all get a bigger piece. And while I know that that's important and it's really what I was trained in and what I know, I also feel the contradiction of that. And I think that is the thing that gets solved locally, is that we all have to figure out what defines a good life beyond the total value of goods and services produced in the economy, right? And we all have to figure out what it means to live locally and to have relationships and produce things together, whether they have value in a consumable sense or just in a kind of quality of life sense. Those are the kind of things that make a place worth living in, right? Yes, you should add value, you should reduce waste. You should also figure out, the things that make a life worth living and try not to think if only we could consume more, that would be the future we need. So that's where I tell you, I'm not a philosopher, I'm an economist, and I'm trained to think about growth. And it is pretty much the way I think and talk. But I think what you're doing here is more exciting than that, because it's about thinking about building a place that you all want to be, and that will be here generations to come in ways that respond to what people need to have good lives, not just a nice consumption list. So for that reason, and with 2 minutes to spare, I stop. Questions?